This is Declarations.
What you have to do, then you have to fight. You have that drive. You're going to go through bad times. You're going to go through difficult periods, and you got to keep going.
Hi, I'm Todd Rich, co-founder of Declaration Partners and head of our real estate investing business. Welcome to Declarations, a podcast where top investors and business leaders share their insights and provide an independent perspective. Our goal is to uncover the stories behind their success and understand the principles that guide their decisions in life, family, and business. Through these conversations, we hope to become better investors. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Jimmy Weil, an entrepreneur, investor, and lifelong competitor whose career started in paint manufacturing and then extended to real estate, gas stations, and more. Jimmy is best known as the founder of Insl-x, a specialty paint and coatings company that he built into one of the leading independent brands in the United States before selling it to Benjamin Moore, a division of Berkshire Hathaway. But Jimmy's story extends well beyond the paint business. He's been involved in the gas station and convenience store sector, serves on the board of an insurance brokerage, and has spent decades investing across industries, including my favorite, real estate. Jimmy played Division I basketball at Boston University and is often described as a competitor with the mindset of an athlete and the instincts of an entrepreneur. He raised his family in Scarsdale, New York, and now lives in Miami, where he still roots for the Yankees, even as he remains active in both business and philanthropy. I've known Jimmy my entire life, and I'm proud to call him and his family close personal friends. I'm also honored that Jimmy and his family have chosen to invest with us at Declaration. Jimmy, welcome to the Declarations podcast.
Thanks, Todd. It's nice to be here with you. And many, many years ago when we first met, I never thought that we'd end up talking on a podcast. So it certainly is. There weren't even podcasts.
Never in a million years, but I'm glad you're here. Jimmy, as you know, I like to start every episode with the same question. What's your declaration? What is your personal mission statement or your guiding principles in business and in life?
Well, Todd, it's simple for me. I try to always treat people with respect, treat people kindly, and help them whenever I can, which sounds like a very glorified thing to do, which anyone should normally do. Unfortunately, I probably have not been successful with that my whole life, but that's really what I try to do, and that seems to be how I live my life and how I hope my kids live their lives.
Well, it's a good one. Just to help people is a great way to go through life. Let's start at the beginning. Where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit about your family life, what that was like.
I was born in Wadsworth Hospital in Harlem, New York, which is no longer there. I don't even know if it's part of Cornell Medical now. Who knows what happened to that place? And then I lived in the Bronx for a number of early years in my life. Fordham Road was where we lived, and ventured from there to Riverdale, which was a huge step up in those days, and then moved up to Westchester County, a town called Eastchester, New York, when I was in about 5th to 6th grade.
And now growing up, if I remember right, your mom had some health problems and your dad was an entrepreneur. He started, I think it was Stevens Paint Company, if I remember correctly, just a few years before you were born. So tell us, what was it like?
My dad was a German immigrant, and he came over late during the war, and his family had a paint business in Germany. So he came over to this country and got a job working for a paint company in New York. And then from there, he started his own business. When I was a month old, which was 1950, my mother contracted polio right before the vaccine. And she was in an iron lung and basically out of the house for the first year of my life, My father had already started a business. I had a brother who was 6 years older than me. And, he worked hard and had a rough life. It wasn't easy in those days. And a lady came to live with us at the time. It certainly, we didn't know from housekeepers in those days. I actually shared a room with her in the apartment we lived in the Bronx. And she became, at that time, probably the most important person in my life. And sort of raised me. And, for her, I could do nothing wrong, which is always nice for someone to think there's nothing you can do wrong. So her name was Margaret, and she passed away when she was 85. I was about 30. And my daughter Mandy is actually named after her. So really, it was a different type of upbringing than certainly what maybe a lot of people are used to today. My father worked very hard, went to work early, came home at 6 o'clock. Every night we had dinner at 6:30. The dinner lasted about 15 minutes, not a lot of conversation. You know what I mean? You had the fruit cup first and that was it.
And so what do you think when you think back about that experience, right? A difficult, your mom's health issues, your dad running a business, it sounds like Margaret was a wonderful influence. But how do you think all of that influenced you as you ultimately grew into being an entrepreneur?
Well, it wasn't like I didn't grow up in a family where we had great discussions about business. We're talking about the stock exchange in the days they call that. And with my mother being sick, and also Margaret took care of my mother, I was sort of on my own from a young age, And in those days where I lived, you were on the street most of the day. You came home for dinner, you're on the street. And when you're on the street at that age, even at the young age, you sort of learn about people. Things are done with a handshake. Who's a good guy, who's a bad guy. When you got to fight, when you can get away from fighting. And that was really how I learned. My parents didn't have time to spend that much time with me. People say, well, how did you get to school? Because, of course, you're living it now. And even when my kids are growing up, you drive the kids to school. But how did you get to school? I walked to kindergarten. That's how I got to school. So it was a different type of upbringing than a lot of people maybe in my situation now were used to.
Now, you ended up on the streets, as you called it, playing a lot of basketball, I imagine, and you ended up going to college at Boston University, played there. I can't imagine there are a ton of short Jewish guys playing basketball for Division I team. Tell me, what was that like? You must have been a hard worker.
Yeah, well, I played a lot of basketball. I played a lot of stickball. I played a lot of punchball. You played everything, And in those days, you didn't have to go to groups or you didn't have to have parents taking you. You went down to the street. You got 18 guys and you had a baseball game in a playground. It was maybe a better way of life, So I love basketball. I always loved basketball. And I started playing when I was very young and continued to play and was pretty good in high school. But in high school, I could take a lot of shots because my team wasn't too good. So I enjoyed that. And I worked hard and I loved the game. I love the team. I love the team concept of the game. To this day, I like watching it because of that. And yeah, there weren't a lot of Jewish kids on my college team. I think maybe one. But the game sort of changes when you play Division I sports, because instead of shooting the ball, and there wasn't a 3-point shot at the time, my job was to bring the ball up court and give it to the guys who were 6'5", 6'7", and play defense. So from shooting and scoring to playing defense and passing the ball, it was a different game. Still loved it. Still kept on playing it after college. But it was a great experience. Taught a lot of life lessons.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. What are some of the life lessons? You mentioned what lessons you learned on the streets, from reading people and how to act in different situations. What about from playing ball all those years? What are some lessons that you then took with you into business and life?
Well, teamwork certainly is important, not backing down. Unfortunately, there's a time when you have to have an argument, a time when you have to disagree, and a time when you don't. So I learned, I think, sort of when I had to disagree, when I had to stand up for myself, the desire to win, which teaches you that. We didn't get participation trophies in those days. And it was
you still don't in business,
type of, in business, right? Yeah. But you know what I'm saying. It's a different world today, obviously, than it was. So the life lessons in playing, not just basketball, any sport, anything we have to put in time and work at it, I think is always a plus in how you're going to end up.
Now, you finished that part of your life, and then you were going to be a lawyer? What happened?
What happened was I was up in Boston University, and I started there in 1968, and I played basketball freshman year when freshmen couldn't play varsity. And then I played varsity as a sophomore, and I hurt my ankle playing, and they wanted to fuse the joint in my ankle. I spent 4 years up there and had no idea what I wanted to do. The paint business was not an option for me. I didn't see myself loading trucks and making paint. But, there I was at the end, loading trucks and making paint. So I thought I would go to law school for 3 more years up in Boston and then maybe find what I wanted to do and that's how I ended up going to law school. I probably wouldn't have been a very good lawyer anyway, but
Many business leaders probably would not have been good lawyers. So while you were in law school, it sounds like you needed to, come back unexpected and actually join your dad running the paint business.
That is what my dad had two partners, and sometimes what happens with partners is they stay together because of mutual greed or to earn a living, and they really didn't have a great relationship. And when my dad, who was never sick, big, strong guy, got sick, and my brother had been in the business and already left the business, he was afraid that his partners would steal everything from him. So he was supposed to come back. I took a leave of absence.
That's not what you look for in a partner. I
No,
think.
that's not what you look for in a partner. But
Yeah.
sometimes you're with a partner, and you can't
I
get
get
out, And I ended up taking a leave of absence from law school after one semester and going back to help out in the paint business. And I immediately inherited the president's job. I was loading the trucks and I was making the paint. And the factory was like a Dickens novel. Today, they would arrest anyone who let anybody work in conditions like that. There was no steel-tip shoes. There were no respirators. You know what I mean? I used to wash my hands with xylene at the end of the day to get the dirt off my hands. So it was just a crazy, the atmosphere. But I stayed there. Unfortunately, my father's health never improved. I got married, and then I got into this habit called eating. And I thought, well, I'm here, so I'm either going to leave this place or I'm going to buy everybody out, including my father, which I ended up doing. My father took a walk with Judy, who you knew, my wife, and said to her on the walk, he said, listen, talk him out of buying the business. He's never going to make it. The kind of confidence you want to have behind you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
that's what you expect from your dad.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I bought the business and I bought out my dad and his two partners. And that was in 1978, 79.
Got it. So you went from your dad had two bad partners he didn't have a relationship with, to deciding, I don't want partners. I'm going to do this on my own. So that took real gumption. That's chutzpah there to do it. And so, you ended up turning that, what I think was Stevens Paint Company, into something different. You turned it into Insl-x. So talk about that transition. How did you grow from that hard company to what you ended up becoming?
Stevens Paint Company was basically a company that sold paint to what you would call drum reconditioners, which most people don't even know what drum reconditioners are.
Yeah, so why don't you tell the audience what's a drum reconditioner?
This is going to be a highlight for these people. I'm going to tell you that right now. Drum reconditioners were guys who bought 55-gallon drums where they had resins or stuffs or whatever they put in there, and took them to plants, a lot of them in your home state, New Jersey. There was one Bayonne barrel right by the bridge. You could see drums hanging. The guy who owned that was Frank Langella's father, the actor Frank Langella. That was his company. And they took the drums, they threw the stuff on the ground that was in them, because in those days, no one knew about groundwater or environmental issues. It's in the dirt. Nothing's going to happen, right? They burn the outside out, bang all the dents out of the drums, and then they would repaint them. And 95% of our business was selling the exterior coatings for those drums. And it was basically from the Carolinas up through New England was where the business was. That was 95% of business when I bought it. And I think I had 6 or 8 employees working for me at the time.
Okay. Not that glamorous a business, right? When one thinks of, the beautiful paint colors that you can get at a Home Depot, that's not it. You're doing the coatings.
Black drum enamel was a big part of our business.
All right. And then how did you then switch to, Insl-x was no longer really sort of a coatings company for different paints, right?
Somehow they owned this company called Insl-x. I don't know how they even got it. And they made insulating varnishes and things like that, very small sizes, pints and quarts. And they would sell it to people who did experiments. In other words, an experiment may be done in Germany, let's say. And it would say, we used Insl-x E44 varnish to coat the electrode. So we would get orders from all those people. Now, fantastic, but you can't eat very well on selling pints of paint, So I took the Insl-x name. At the time, they had a couple of products that were really paint related. Like they had a product called Freezer Coat, and you could go into a freezer. It was USDA approved, and paint the paint in the freezer without ever taking out the meats, just cover them, which was a big, big advantage, right? And I thought, if I'm going to do anything, I better find some niche products and specialty products that other people don't want to make. I wasn't competing on trade sale paints with Sherwin-Williams or PPG or Glidden or Benjamin Moore. I had no volume. I had no business. We didn't even have water paint in our plant, I think, in Yonkers. And so we came up making 15-minute dry enamels, swimming pool paint, primers that the big companies didn't want to make because the batch sizes wouldn't be big enough.
So you competed with the big guys by not competing with them.
Absolutely. And I made the big guys my customers. I sold Sherwin-Williams stores. I sold PPG stores. I sold Glidden stores, which had huge distribution in those days. And we would continue to come up with specialty products. And that's how we started to grow Insl-x in those days.
So it was innovation around the chemistry, around the product, or was it more just you saw the market need?
We saw the market need. I mean, innovation in the paint industry, innovation, if you have a product that really does well, that's a little unique, which we had plenty of over the years as the company grew and we started selling Home Depot and Lowe's and Walmart, it lasts about maybe 12 to 18 months and then someone copies the product. There are no patents you can use.
Now, I'll admit, I was a kid when I first got introduced to your paint company, but I always thought of Insl-x as the red roof from a Pizza Hut was an Insl-x red. That was what I always learned. Is that how'd you get that customer?
We found a customer in Wichita, Kansas, where Pizza Hut was located, who did the roofs of Pizza Huts, and we manufactured acrylic aliphatic urethane, which means nothing to you.
Nothing.
Sounds good, doesn't it?
It's the biggest word you know.
That's it. Then there's a hyphen there. And so we manufactured a product for them to paint the roofs that would give them long duration without the red fading, keep the gloss. And that was one of the products that we sold to them. And then we put it in the line and started selling those type of more high-performance products in the Insl-x line.
Got it. So tell me, you scaled Insl-x meaningfully. What was the toughest period in doing so? What were some of the biggest challenges that you had to navigate that really sort of tested your conviction in whether or not this was a good idea?
Yeah, I bought a lot of companies when I first went in there, and I used to call them cigar butts because I couldn't afford to buy any real businesses.
There was another famous investor who used the cigar butt theory to buy businesses. It worked out well for him. It was Warren Buffett. It worked out well for him.
What do you know? Maybe he stole it from me.
Maybe. He's a little older than you are. But anyway, so tell us about your cigar butts.
My cigar butts were really cigar butts. So we would buy these companies. We'd take every sale we could take out of them. Sometimes we would use the label. I had more labels than Carter had liver pills, from all these companies. And then in 1985, I purchased a company that was probably 4 or 5 times bigger than me, that did what we call trade sale paints. Trade sale paints are wall paint, primers, ceiling paint, house paints. And they sold at the time to what we call mass merchants, which were like, at the time, Richards, Channel, Bradley's, Times Square stores. You would know some of those because you're from the Northeast. Ames department stores. They were the ones who really sold that product. The product was terrible. The company I bought was Evergreen with Marine Midland Bank. They had debt up to their neck. I had very little debt because I wasn't big enough. And we borrowed from a guy who was with Bank of New York, who made a loan to me. At the time, I did have financial statements. Your dad had already come, which I'm sure I should mention. Todd's dad was my first accountant who I hired and one of my closest friends in the world to this day. And when he came, before him, my financials were like on toilet paper. And when he came in, he said, we can do this, we can do that. And I said, boy, that's really great. And we're going to save you $75,000. I said, $75,000? Unbelievable. And then he gave me a bill for $80,000. I couldn't get that.
That's only net 5.
But your dad, and I'm not saying this because I'm speaking with you because I've said this too many times, was such a tremendous help to any small amount of success that I've had. He was a very big part of that and a friend. So we started.
I know he feels very, very close to you, as we all.
So we started working, and I bought this company with a guy who went from Bank of New York, lent me the money to buy this company, and also with that company, I got into the trade sale business and could make water-based paints. And also they had a bigger plant in Yonkers. So now I was running a solvent-based plant and a water-based plant and expanding my business into different markets.
And this all went perfectly, exactly according to plan?
Oh, couldn't have been better. It was unbelievable. Yeah. We had a few hiccups. We borrowed that money at 18% in 1985. So when you hear the interest rate is 5%, how can we exist? Come on, you can exist, But at the end of the day, we bought that company, and Home Depot and Lowe's, basically Home Depot, was really legitimizing that business at that particular time. Because the paint that we sold these people, we'd give lifetime warranties because it didn't matter. No one cared. Oh, it'll be there for your grandchildren. It was terrible. The paint was terrible. And so it was all however you sold in those days, that's that's what it was. And we sold that business. We sold 5 accounts in that business that we bought. We bought it in March of 85. And in December of 85, we sold the 5 major accounts, right, to a company that was owned by Sears, which was the biggest company selling paint in the world at that time. We sold those 5 accounts. We kept the factory. We kept all the inventory. We made the paint. And that was really what got us over the hump where we could start investing.
And so when you sold those accounts, so what, you paid down a bunch of the debt, and that got you out of the
paid down all the
hole?
debt. We sold those 5 accounts for 4 times what we paid for the whole business. That was an important thing. And then at that point, they didn't want us to stay in Yonkers. We were leasing a building. So we built a plant on 70 acres in Stony Point, New York, which was the most compliant paint plant in the country at that time, and moved up.
Got it. So all the environmental stuff that you had to deal with, the pouring bad materials out of the drums, you're now no longer doing that in Stony Point.
No, we were no longer doing that in Stony. We weren't doing it in Yonkers. It was a drum reconditioners. Make sure you get that right. I don't want people coming to my house.
Okay. All right. No, thanks for clarifying. I'm going to tell a personal story here, which is that I toured that plant. And so, Jimmy, you mentioned that our families are really close. You had the unique distinction of giving me one of my first jobs ever. I had like an internship in high school. I think it was my first week driving or something. And you let me drive up to the plant, and I got a tour. I'd never seen something like that before in my life. And you let me then sit in on some sales calls with you and your president or head of sales. And I'm embarrassed to admit this. I don't think I was a very good employee. I literally fell asleep on the job.
You were my best intern ever, because I never would have another intern after you. You came up, and at the time you were swimming. You were doing a lot of swimming.
I was a swimmer. Yeah, I was a swimmer in high school.
And
that's right.
That was a plant where I think my office was in the basement at the time. And I had this tiny little couch. And
it was very comfortable, I remember.
Well, I was very impressed that you were flexible enough to fit your long body into that couch, And we started a Rip Van Winkle scholarship under your name for all future interns. But it's great to see where that rest has gotten you at this point. I'm proud of you.
I will admit, I no longer nap in the middle of meetings these days. I've really grown up, but I thank you for giving me the chance.
It was my pleasure, buddy.
Hi, this is Todd Rich. Thank you for listening to the Declarations Podcast, where top investors and business leaders share their insights and provide an independent perspective. We hope you're enjoying this episode. If you'd like to learn more about Declaration Partners or listen to more episodes of the Declarations Podcast, please visit our website at www.declarationpartners.com. And now back to the episode. Okay, so you grew this business. You had some tough times with the debt, but then, some good ones with these. You bought, you sold, you did some well. You ultimately, after scaling, you decided to actually sell the entire business to Benjamin Moore. Why would you do that? Why not keep on going?
We had gone through from when we moved up to Stony Point, and organic growth wasn't going where we really wanted it to go. I acquired about 6 or 7 companies in Florida, in Canada. We had plants in Mineral Wells, Texas. We had plants in Picayune, Mississippi, and Edgewater, Florida. And the business grew substantially during that period of time.
So you were probably traveling all over the place.
I was on a plane almost every week. And then with that growth, we vertically integrated. So we had a trucking company, we had a printing company, we made our own resins. So all of those businesses became part of the business. So we became a size that was a decent sized company. And I loved that business. I loved it. But I was 58 years old at the time. The multiples were very high to buy a type of business. And I was approached by a number of people. Neither one of my children wanted to come into the business. And I was still a big part of the business. I was an involved owner. And, I had the vice president and all of that. And all of them did great jobs. So my board of directors was me, so it was easy. I decided that it was time to look and potentially sell the business, which is what I did. Yeah.
You ever look back? You said you loved that business. You ever look back and feel like, you wished you were still doing it?
You always look back. Yeah. I mean, since that time, I've had a number of other businesses that I bought and sold, and I'm still involved in a number of businesses. But you can't fall in love with assets. You have to sort of move on and do what you think is right. So I don't look back too much about it.
You sold to Benjamin Moore. That's a subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway. Now, a lot of entrepreneurs, after they sell their business to a Berkshire subsidiary, they decide to stay on. I mean, that's something Berkshire claims that they're, good at. You chose to leave. Did you think when you were going to leave, do you think you were going to just take it easy, hang up your cleats and just relax? Or were you pretty sure that you were going to start up again as an entrepreneur?
No, I was sure I was going to start up again. When I sold to Benjamin Moore, who I knew very well, the guy who was chairman of Benjamin Moore at the time, they had sold to Berkshire Hathaway a few years before, was a very good friend of mine. We used to actually take business trips and take customers with us who were both of our customers together. So we had a very close relationship. He decided to leave Benjamin Moore as president, put a guy in as president, and he became chairman of Benjamin Moore. So I knew everybody at Benjamin Moore. I knew all the people. I was president of the National Association, Paint and Coatings, so I knew everybody. And it wasn't going to work with me working for someone else. And I tried to explain that to them, and they wanted me to sign a 5-year contract. And I said, listen, I'll come to work. I'll do whatever you want me to do. Don't even pay me. You don't want me to sign the 5 But he knew better. So I signed the 5-year contract. And in less than a year, we both decided to part ways, which is when I started investing in some other businesses.
It sounds like, as you alluded to, you started investing in other businesses. You got involved in gas stations, convenience stores, later insurance brokerage. And most of these businesses, you were pretty darn active. So tell me first, what drew you to those sorts of businesses? Why did you want to do this?
The first business I truly invested in was purchasing gas stations. One of my lawyers came to me and said, I know this guy, we have this deal, he can buy all these Shell gas stations. At the time, Shell and Exxon were divesting themselves of their stations. And this gentleman owns...
And they were keeping the environmental risk, if I remember correctly.
They were keeping the environmental risk, yeah, and divesting themselves for a period of time. And divesting themselves of those stations. And everyone said to me, what about the environmental thing? I said, they got a couple of tanks under the ground. I'm dealing with 100,000-gallon tank farms here. This is like making cookies. I really wasn't too concerned with that. And it was difficult to raise money in 2009, 2010. So that was the first time I actually brought someone else into deals with me, except for my real estate partner, who and I've been with since 1985. So I raised some money. I put in a fair amount of the money and was working with this guy.
I think, just for disclosure to the audience, it's fair to say that my family was also an investor. We were very proud partners of yours.
At the end of the day, we had a bit of a falling out, and he wasn't doing what he was supposed to do. So unfortunately, we had to step in and take over the running of the business. Now, maybe a number of people, a number of my partners who I brought in said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm not walking away from this. I have your money. And which is, it better than I do. It's one thing to invest your own money. It's another thing to invest other people's money.
It sits with you. It's a real responsibility. You got to take it seriously. But you did. I mean, to your credit, this wasn't a passive investment. You didn't write a letter and say, hey, guys, sorry, it's going poorly. You jumped in with both feet.
We jumped in with both feet. And we, unfortunately, were in this thing in litigation for 8 years. But at the end, it worked out. We had a very good exit, and we had a very good 10 or 12 years, always paying dividends, and it worked out well. It was a very interesting business. And to this day, I'm still in that business, and we own some gas stations and convenience stores, which is run by a partner of mine.
Well, and you probably know this, but it just got a little bit more interesting to be in those businesses now from a tax perspective, right? With the 100% depreciation, it's obviously there are other reasons to be in the business than just tax. But as son of accountant, I can't help myself but mention it.
It's better now, but it was a great business we were in. And, some of my investors, a lot of them were friends and people I knew. And this one guy, an elderly guy, older than me, so I can call him elderly, would continually write me about electric cars. And electric cars, so at one point I wrote him back. I said, Lou, the only time you have to worry about gas is when you go to the bathroom. I got this covered. Don't worry about electric cars, So
that's your version of an investor report.
That was it.
That was it.
And I told him personally,
Wow.
So that investment worked out. And in the interim, while I was in that, I invested in an insurance company in Houston, Texas with someone. Again, just someone I knew said these guys wanted to buy an insurance company in Texas. They insured the low-value dwellings in Texas, like $250,000 to $400,000 homes, catastrophe insurance. We were buying it from a big company, and they were going to go to an equity fund. And it turned out that I said, why do they want to go to an equity fund? Let me talk to them. And that turned out to be another fabulous business and a good investment. We're just exiting right now.
And now you're involved in that one too.
I was a general partner in that one.
And so, one could listen to this and say, oh my God, you're in paint and coatings, you're in gas stations. Or maybe there's some similarity, but I don't think so. And then you go on to insurance brokerage in Texas, like not at all similar. And yet I would argue that, they all need strong local relationships. They're all people businesses. You need operational discipline. What are the things that you look for? I mean, what are the things that tied those together in your head?
Well, it's funny because I'm also involved in a cybersecurity business.
From paint to cybersecurity, you've really arrived.
Right. I've stepped up, right? And everything I look at today, not everything, but a lot of it has AI components to it. With AI, we could have a very short conversation what I know about AI. But they're businesses that it's still about people, thank God. So when I go into these businesses, like the cybersecurity business, the two young guys, Ivy League guys, started this up, raised some money, came to me. I invested in a company. They asked me to go on the board. I said yes. They're doing very well. But having an idea and playing with numbers is different from running a business and dealing with day-to-day operations of a business and people and problems and how you handle the problems. And all of these companies that I've gotten on, I'm involved in a SaaS business where I'm a large investor. I'm involved in a propane business where I'm on the board. These are only the businesses that I'm on the board in. And it still comes down, at the end of the day, you can run as many sheets and projections and do all that you want, but it still comes down to people running the business, selling, and take care. Because without selling or without raising money, you don't have a business.
Look, I'm one of those Wall Street Ivy League types who went to Wall Street and spent a lot of time in spreadsheets. But one of the reasons I've always been drawn to real estate is because I think at its core, it is also a people business, and it requires you to get down and dirty and to negotiate and to find ways to add value. And I think that's one of the things you've done. Let's spend a second tying that back to where we started. How did the life lessons that you learned on the streets of the Bronx, playing basketball or stickball, how did they come to roost as you serve now on boards or get involved in all these different types of businesses?
I guess, Todd, how they came to roost, and I'm sure a lot of people you talk to who grew up similar to how I grew up. And I said it at the beginning, you sort of know how to take care of yourself. You sort of look at a guy and can, see, is he a decent guy? Is he not a decent guy? I made many mistakes. The gas stations were a very good mistake. I had too big of an ego to think that I couldn't get this guy to listen to me because what I wanted to tell him was right. So what you have to do, then you have to fight. You have that drive. You're going to go through bad times. You're going to go through difficult periods, and you got to keep going. Because one of the things, my wife, who you knew, passed away when she was sick for a number of years, and she gave me a plaque from Winston Churchill, and it said on the plaque, when you're walking through hell, keep walking. And that is sort of what you have to do. nothing's going to be perfect. And people you see out there, and I know a lot of people extremely successful, many, 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 many more times successful than I've been. Talking about monetarily, I think my life with my family has been as successful as you could be. But you have to keep going. You have to keep going. You can't stop.
David Rubenstein has often talked about, in some ways, it's easier to succeed when you don't come from anything, right? Because you learn those lessons and you have hunger. And it's harder for him, and for others, maybe as a parent, to then teach your kids the same hunger. You had a modicum of success. Their life is easy, or easier at least. There's less of the stress that you described. How do you give them that same hunger, the knowledge that you've just got to walk through hell, keep walking? How do you teach people that if they can't live it for themselves?
It's a difficult thing to do because they haven't really lived it. I think a lot of people in my position who have children, my children, they're your age, a little bit younger than you, and they're doing fine and they're great people. And they've showed their mettle as human beings many times over, that they're good people and they want to do for others, and they've been pretty successful at what they do. And they feel, I don't know anything, which is fine. That's part of the thing. It's hard to express that to them. It's hard to tell someone stories like I'm telling, or that anyone can tell you who's gone through this. David could tell the same stories that I'm telling. But you try to make sure they're good people, that they have a desire to succeed, that they want to do for others as well as their own families. But, I can't stop them when we go to restaurants from ordering 12 different sides. You know what I mean? When you don't need. I can't stop them from paying Dad. What do you do? Because to me, $5 is $5, $10 is $10. Those numbers are gone now. It's like I have my grandson put change on piggyback just to make sure he knows what change is. So that's hard to do.
So do you look for those qualities? You back all these businesses. They're all run by other people. They're run by other entrepreneurs. How do you look for those qualities? Do you have a preference for people who, didn't come from much, or how do you test if they have that hunger?
It turns out that, I like someone who's striving to get somewhere. And I've invested with a number of funds where people are very successful. But that's not what I look for. I'm investing for really great growth. It's people who are hungry, who want to make it, who work like dogs, you know what I mean? Who are trying to succeed, and hopefully who are good people, come from good families and good values. That's all you can do. And you hope you're right 51% of the time.
Yeah, I think those are real important qualities. And that's what we look for when we find partners or employees, or same thing. I think it's real important. Now, when you look back, you've had a couple of successes, a couple of times were a little hard, as you just said, different business cycles. So what would be the lessons that you'd give to today's entrepreneurs, to the guys, or gals who would be starting their own company? World's different today, but I imagine the lessons might be the same. What would you say to them?
I think certainly you got to be willing to work hard. And I know that sounds very, trite, you know what I mean? But you got to be able to work hard and to be committed to it and stay with it and have the fortitude and the gumption to be able to see things through, to find something you like to do, a business you would like is nice, but if it's successful, you'll learn to like it.
That's how you felt about paint, huh?
Absolutely. Exactly. You know what I mean? I wasn't being recruited by Wall Street. I figured I had to do something. You look for a business, like I'm talking to someone now who's getting into a business of picking up waste, not garbage, but, grease things and things from hospitals with trucks, and the one thing I like about that business is you don't have to worry about AI taking over that business. So in this world, when you're looking at a business, you have to say, hey, is this business going to be here? What's the duration of this business? Can we sell the business? Could it be a roll-up, which a lot of people are doing today with like air conditioning companies? And I see a lot of people doing roll-ups and private equity guys getting into that, So you got to choose something you want to do. You got to work hard at it. And hopefully you have a roadmap as to how you're going to grow it and succeed.
You mentioned, this is sort of the second time you mentioned private equity guys looking at it. You also mentioned, that one, I guess maybe it was the insurance company was looking at a private equity fund. They ultimately picked you. What do you think are some of the differences between a family investor right? Someone like you that I presume might be, willing to have a longer term perspective than some PE funds. But what do you see are the differences? How do you market yourself as different from them?
I think that equity funds, and I don't want to categorize them into one big group, but a lot of them don't really know how to run a business. They're very smart guys. They're very financially savvy guys. They know how to do things, and they're smart enough to hire people from the outside who can run it. Depending on the size of the business, I get involved, and I'm not in a 5-year cycle to turn it over. I'll give it more time if it needs to work. Maybe I'll pull a plug on presidents quicker than an equity fund would, which I've done a number of times. And I try to work with the people, and I develop a relationship with them. A good example, the guy who runs my convenience store business is like family to me now. The guy who ran the insurance business, I had, where we would speak on the phone and if we were looking to buy something or sell them, we discussed that, but he ran it. He was just a super guy. I've just done another deal with him in a restoration business down in Louisiana, So that's what I look for.
One of the things that it's always struck me, and I know, we've known each other for years, is that you really do build friends. You build relationships in these businesses. You talked about it earlier. My dad was originally your accountant. You guys have now been close friends for over 50 years. And you just mentioned 2 other people who you're close with. And obviously there's a mutual real estate investment that we've made together with another partner who's a very, very close personal friend, has been for years. So I think that one of the lessons that you've been able to bring to business is that it can be fun. And you've got a sense of humor about it. You laugh even through the bad times. So can you just talk for a second about how you think the sense of humor can play a role in life and in business?
Yeah, I guess I do. I have a sense of humor. I like to laugh. And I always tell people, you can laugh and cry and be happy and sad. But when you're just laughing, you're not sad, and it makes you feel good. And I guess because of my life, even when I was young, living my life the way I did, like with my mom in a wheelchair and all of that stuff, I always would joke around. But I just think it's important to have a sense of humor. It may be not for everybody, but I've become so close with so many people I've worked with, and am very fortunate to have some good friends over the years. And I saw it, and not to get morbid, but my wife was sick for 3 years, and I took care of her for 3 years. That's what I wanted to do.
And your kids, by the way, I mean, I've known them for, in addition to doing their own lives with their own relationships and businesses, they really stepped up.
But at the end of the day, we laughed, and we laughed through the 3 years, and we laughed in the hospital, and we and that's helped us get through, and, people would say to me, it's unbelievable what you're doing, some of my friends, but why did you just get around the clock nurses? And I had around the clock nurses. When I needed them. But at the end of the day, I was walking one day with Judy, and Mark was with me, and she was a little down in Mark's my son. She was a little down in the dumps, and I said, I made her laugh. I said something, and she laughed. She thought I was very funny, or not. And I turned to Mark, Mark, this is why I don't want people around the clock, because no one's going to make her laugh, and no one's going to know how to do that. It gets you through bad times. It's crazy, but it gets you through bad times.
Let's switch, because then let's talk about your philanthropy. And yeah, there are a bunch of things you've been involved in, so I won't have time to list them all, with Boston University, White Plains Hospital, you've coached for underprivileged kids. But the one that always jumped out at me was your support of Gilda's Club, because of the laughter, right? I mean, this is Gilda Rat. Well, why don't you tell everyone what is Gilda's Club?
Well,
Who's
Gilda's
it named
Club was started by Gilda Rat. It was on Saturday Night Live. And I got involved with Gilda's Club because a young lady who I went to high school with and married one of my best friends came down with cancer. And she was involved in it. And she said, Jimmy, could you please get involved? And bang. So I got involved with it, and we did a lot of good things. There's a house in White Plains, and they honored me one year, which was very nice, And I'll tell you a quick story. They had a comedian every year at this Red Door, it was called, the fair. And he was from Saturday Night Live, and he wrote for Gilda Raz, and his name, I don't recall his name. So when I went up to speak, the first thing I said was, usually when I come to speak at these things, I wear 2 ribbons. I said, one of them is because I actually work for a company that manufactures something in this country. And I was totally crazed by the fact that we were moving manufacturing out of this country during that period of time. And I said, the second one is I'm actually a Jew with one home. And there's not a lot of them here tonight, And the guy came up, he said, Jimmy, I'm going to use that one. He said, here's one for you. So Gilda's Club was great, very rewarding. White Plains Hospital's been good. I'm involved with a number of hospitals in the city. I was involved with sports things with kids, underprivileged kids, and try to give as much as I can to as many things as I can. And that, do the best I can do with that. That's for sure.
No, look, you've always given back. How do you decide outside of business, outside of your family, outside of these, some of these philanthropies, how do you decide where to spend your time?
Well, I don't have a stamp collection and I'm not really great with hobbies. So I spend a lot of my time, even to this day, working, talking to people, investing. People still call me up and ask me questions. I don't know why, And after that, I really want to spend as much time as I possibly can with my kids and my grandkids. To me, that's my life.
I will say, and your kids, you've got, both your son, Mark, who I'm very, close with, as you know, and your son-in-law, Seth, both entrepreneurs on their own, right? They both built their own businesses, both in investing, Mark in real estate, Seth is a, credit-related hedge fund, and you're involved. I get the sense that you're acting like a mentor and a coach to them too.
We often speak about both of their businesses, and we speak about businesses that I'm involved with, and they're involved with the family offices and that we do. And yet I'm very, very fortunate. My kids are great. My daughter, who, if you don't mention her, she'll kill you, Amanda, is an art therapist who went to the Art Institute of Chicago, and she does a lot of philanthropy stuff. And she's good. She's the boss. So I had to throw that out there in case she sees this.
I hope she does. I didn't know the story about her being named after Margaret. All right, well, Jimmy, this has been fun, but it has come time for our closing questions. So, is there a book that most influenced your thinking or your personal development? It could be a picture book.
A picture book? Do you ask anyone else on this podcast? If you told them it could be a...
Well, they're not all in paint. They're not all in paint.
There's a coloring book. I read, obviously, and I would read a lot of sports books because I love sports. One of the books I really liked which isn't a sport, it was written by Malcolm Gladwell, was called David and Goliath. 1944, the FDR book was a great book. But the book, I guess, that taught me the most, which we've all written in, is the book of Hard Knocks, And I think I've learned the most from the book of Hard Knocks, And you go through it, and that's always a theme of what I'm saying, is that you just can't give up. You got to keep going. And I don't care how successful you've been or how much money you may or not have. We've all gone through difficult times in our lives. And that's a book that we're all authors of, and we all learn from.
What's the best advice you received from your parents or that you now give to your own kids?
Well, hearing your other podcast, I knew you asked that question. I love my parents and, they're my parents, but they never gave me too much advice,
Well, your dad said not to get in the paint business.
Should have listened to him. The advice I just try to give people is the same thing I've been saying, treat people the right way. Try to live by the golden rule. And I don't mean the rule that he who has the gold makes the rules. You know what I mean? I mean, just treat people nicely. My wife was huge on that. Judy, there's nobody she didn't treat nicely. There's nobody she didn't try to help. She didn't have any falseness to her. You know what I mean? She was just a kind, decent person who wanted to help other people.
Always. Your house was always full of people who she was helping all the time.
I didn't even know who was in my house most of the time. I would come home from work and walk upstairs and someone would pass me in the hall and say hello. I'd say, well, who are you? It was, if you needed something, she was there. And she was the most, other than Margaret, and it's funny because the two most influential people in my life were women, were Margaret and Judy. Most people, I worked for this guy. He was a genius. Well, I didn't have that. I didn't have that opportunity, So I think that's it.
Last question. The Declaration of Independence talks about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, Jimmy, what do you do in pursuit of happiness?
Well, again, I think I said it already. I enjoy my family. That's my real pursuit of happiness. And I enjoy business. And I enjoy mentoring and working with younger people and trying to help them grow whatever they're trying to grow. But to this day, I still try to go to all my grandkids' games. I go to my granddaughter's dance recitals. I'll fly up to New York for a day just to see something. The family to me has always been number one, number two, and number three. The reason for it, maybe because I didn't grow up with that, but to me, that's the most important thing.
This has been fantastic, Jimmy. I really appreciate your insights. I know the audience will too. Thank you for your friendship over so many years. Thank you for your mentorship. Thanks for that first job. And thanks for participating in today's podcast.
It's great to be with you. And it's even better to see the type of young man you've grown up to be and all the success you're having. And I'll keep it going.
Thanks, Jimmy.
This podcast is provided for discussion and informational purposes only, for use by Declaration Partners, LP, together with its affiliates, referred to as Declaration. The information discussed in this podcast may change at any time without notice, and there is no duty by Declaration to update any person to whom this information is provided. This podcast does not constitute an offer to sell or the solicitation of an offer to purchase any investment product or any interest in the fund or any other investment vehicles or accounts managed or advised by Declaration, a Declaration investment product, in any jurisdiction to any person. Any such offer or solicitation for interest in any Declaration investment product will only be made pursuant to such Declaration investment product's definitive offering documents, which contain a description of the material terms, including risk factors, conflicts of interest, fees and charges, and regulatory and tax considerations relating to such Declaration investment product, and which should be reviewed carefully by potential investors prior to making an investment decision. This podcast does not constitute tax or legal advice. The listener is urged to consult a professional tax and/or legal advisors regarding the possible tax, legal, economic, regulatory, or other risks and consequences associated with any investment, and must be able to bear the risks involved. This podcast may contain certain forward-looking statements which constitute Declaration's views with respect to future events, which can be identified by the use of forward-looking terminology such as intend, seek, expect, target, project, or endeavor. These statements are made based upon such views as they exist as of the date herein. There is no assurance that such views are correct or will prove, with the passage of time, to be correct. Actual events or results may differ materially from those contemplated by such forward-looking statements as a result of factors beyond Declaration's control, including, without limitation, any disruptions in global, regional, or local financial, credit, or real estate markets, acts of God, fire, hurricanes, tropical storms, floods, earthquakes, or other natural disasters, outbreaks of an infectious disease, pandemic, or any other serious public health concern, war, terrorism, labor strikes, electricity shortages, or other national or local emergencies, or any combination of the foregoing. David M. Rubenstein is an anchor investor in Declaration Partners Real Estate Fund II and is not an employee of Declaration. Neither the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission nor the Securities Regulatory Authority of any state or other jurisdiction has passed upon the accuracy or adequacy of this podcast. No compensation has been awarded to any speaker for statements made that are either testimonials or endorsements. However, certain speakers may be current or former investors in certain Declaration investment products and may receive reduced fees, priority terms, priority access, co-investment rates, among other preferential treatment, which may pose a conflict of interest. Certain speakers may also be affiliates and/or service providers that receive compensation from Declaration for services provided in their service provider capacity, but have not been compensated specifically for any testimonials or endorsements made herein. All statements made on the podcast are the opinions and beliefs of the speaker and may not necessarily represent the opinions, beliefs, and position of Declaration. Consequently, from the foregoing, no reliance whatsoever should be placed on this podcast, and no decision including any investment decision should be made based on this podcast or on the information contained herein.